fresh raspberries and a little bit of coconut cream, just heated and mixed. And I've also used food grade essential oils that you can consume. So the peppermint oil in the peppermint one and orange oil in here. So it's really important to use food grade, and doTERRA is one brand in particular you could use, or if you go to a health food store. And the tiniest little bit goes a long way. Troubleshooting wise, if you use an oil, the only thing that can happen if you put too much in, they won't set properly in the fridge. It kind of separates a little bit, and the oil will tend to sit on the bottom. But once you've poured them in your mould, put them in the fridge, they're ready in about an hour. If you're really hungry, put them in the freezer, it takes about 10 minutes, and they're done. So this is really good for if you're going to a dinner party and you need to bring dessert, or if you've got a special event, or if you're just celebrating something and want a little treat. And if you take out the sweetener element, essentially it's just good fat. So you can enjoy those. Cool, so the next thing I might do, I'm going to talk about this first, which probably looks a bit odd because it leads really nicely into the fermented veggies. So Amanda mentioned as well about dairy and sensitivity. So I think there's research that supports that 30 to 40% of the adult population have the enzyme to actually be able to process and break down the milk sugar, lactose, properly. So it's a really small percentage, so it's a genetic thing. And I think it will go back to, if you're looking at your lineage and where you've come from and which cultures had a lot of fermented dairy and sour dairy products. So that's kind of a bit of like natural selection, who's able to, who's not. I'm dairy intolerant, definitely, but I can have these products. So it's very similar with ghee, which I'll talk about later. When you take yogurt and you separate, or when you do something like this, so you put it into a cheesecloth and strain it, you end up with essentially curds and whey. So this is the whey, the liquid that comes out of yogurt, and you also end up with the solids, which is like cream cheese, although I've put it in olive oil to kind of make a nice dip kind of thing. So the yogurt, basically a bowl, cheesecloth in a sieve, and pour the yogurt straight into it. Fold the cheesecloth up and put a rubber band around it. And if you can come up with somewhere like this to strain it, or just leave it sitting in the bowl for about at least overnight, up to 24 hours, you end up with the liquid sitting here, not there, but in the bowl. It's jumped out in there on its own. It's amazing. And I'm going to show you what the actual curds look like, which is the cheese. It's a bit messy, sorry. I'll try and open it up. It's not the most attractive looking thing, but it's really delicious. Okay, so if I'll try and hold it up. I might even hold it, it's going to be a bit gross, but I'll hold it up with my hand. Okay.
So that's the cream cheese?
That's the cream cheese. Can you see that actually? It's just like a big lump of, it looks like ricotta, kind of. It's really creamy and delicious. So this is using a full fat, non-homogenized yogurt. So if all yogurt's going to be pasteurized, if you could get raw milk yogurt, even better, but illegal now, so not even an option. But if you can get the least treated yogurt possible, that's your best bet, and full fat definitely. Yeah, so if you can get it from a really good brand where it's grass-fed or etc. is even more ideal. So once you've got this cheese lasts in the fridge for up to a month. This will last for 6 months. And you can do things like put in oil with different combinations of herbs and spices. So I can't handle any milk whatsoever, and I'm not very keen. You won't like this. So I'm not a dairy person, but this I can actually tolerate. So again, it's a case-to-case scenario of what you can tolerate, and someone who's also dairy-free or can't handle lactose might find that this is too much for them, but for me it's fine. The main reason you would make this though is actually for the whey. Is just scanning, waiting for something you can sample. Oh, I've lost this, sorry, I'll just reconnect. So the whey is the main thing that you actually want the cream cheese. Well, the cream cheese is the byproduct. I think I've broken it. Sorry, Amanda, I think I've broken your microphone. No, yeah.
Yeah, the clip's a little bit dodgy.
Yeah.
I lost the spring out of it.
Yeah.
So, you're there.
Or do you want something?
Testing 1, 2. There. That's it.
Okay.
Just pull it in there.
I'll just not do any hair flicks now.
Yeah.
No hair flicks. So the whey is what you want. So the whey has many, many, many uses. One is for fermenting your vegetables as a starter culture. A lot of cultures actually use it as well as a digestive tonic. So if you've got a tummy upset, having a small amount of it. So again, it's the good bacteria is in here, which is why it's used to ferment vegetables, as well as some people drinking it in smoothies. Or, the other really good thing is for soaking your grains in. Well, not grains as such, but quinoa or buckwheat, rice if you eat rice. So when you soak your grains overnight, as we always do, sometimes, if you put in some of this, it's going to help speed up the process as well, help remove as much of the phytic acid as possible. So it's another really good use for it. You can freeze it as well, but it lasts so long in the fridge that one batch is going to last you a long time anyway. So I thought I'd introduce this first because some people prefer to use whey for fermenting rather than salt because it's a bit faster, it speeds it up a bit more. It really depends. You get the same success. I do find it is a little bit quicker. So using salt might take anywhere from 7 days to a fortnight. This can minimise that by a few days if you're really desperate for some sauerkraut. So otherwise, using salt to create your fermented veggies, I'll just talk a little bit about the process and some of the troubleshooting things. This form of fermenting doesn't want oxygen, which is why there's lids on. The kombucha, on the other hand, is a fermentation which needs oxygen. So both of these fermentations are extremely sensitive to certain variables, light, heat, an unclean kitchen, I guess you could say, if your utensils aren't sterilised properly or cleaned properly. It's so easy to make fermented veggies though. It's literally putting the cabbage in the blender, not the blender, food processor. What do you call that? Chopping it up, what's the right word? Can't think. Shredding, yes, someone said shredding. Shredding the cabbage, putting it into a bowl, sea salt on top, and just massaging the cabbage until all the juices and liquid come out, which takes about maybe 4 or 5 minutes. Yeah, so this one's not finished, that's still fermenting. I've found that with the weather this week, it's been a bit up and down, so it's not quite ready. This is going to be a test. So usually when you take it off and it's ready, it'll kind of fizz a bit and some bubbles will come out. So this one's not quite ready. But what I want to show you, and it's really strong smelling at the moment too, really strong. So if I push down on it, can you see all the liquid? There's a fair bit of liquid in there, and as I push down, it is bubbling a fair bit. So once you've put everything in your jar, you just want to find a really nice cozy spot for it, a nice dark cupboard where there's a bit of air that can come through, not in direct sunlight, away from any really intense temperatures like a heater or something. And just keep an eye on it. It's just a matter of tasting it maybe after a week, seeing if it tastes sour enough yet. If not, leaving it a little bit longer, making sure it shouldn't be crisp still, there should be really soggy cabbage by then. And the only things that can really go wrong is a little bit of mould can grow on there, but for mould to grow on there, I've never had that myself, even the first time I tried it. Usually it's just a matter of time, and if it dries out, so if all that liquid didn't come up when I pushed down, I would probably just pour a little bit more water in. Yeah, just to increase the brine, which is just the salt and the water combination. Some things ferment really well, some things don't due to their sugar content. So you always need a carbohydrate, which is your veggies, and some kind of starter culture, which can either be salt, whey, a sachet from a health food store that's got a starter culture in it, or you can actually also use some sauerkraut or fermented veggie brine from your previous batch as well. So it's kind of a continuous cycle. So this one's probably not ready to taste, but I've made a few different combos here if anyone's wanting to try some.
Kerry,
Yeah.
this recipe here.
Yeah.
So do you add the salt and the whey, or just one of them?
No, just one or the other. That's a good question. So you would add just one or the other. I can't get that lid on now. I'll just leave it. Couple of tablespoons of whey versus a couple of teaspoons of salt. Yeah. So either way, it's if you can be bothered doing this and eat this, I'd just use the whey. Definitely. So these ones, they're all cabbage based because it's the easiest to do. So if you've never fermented anything, always start with just cabbage and add in some flavours. Beetroots, carrots, things like that, they get a little bit trickier if you haven't fermented them before. The success rate can be a little bit lower just because they are such a sugar dense carbohydrate. But you can combine them with cabbage and that will even it out. So this one is cabbage with a little bit of beetroot juice, not the actual beetroot, and some cumin. And then I've made a dill and caraway seed and a same one minus dill. So it wasn't very adventurous. I thought I'd keep it a little bit tame, but you can add in different spices and things. And there's so many recipes on the internet. The sterilisation part that I was talking of, I just wash my jars as I would normally and then I whack them in the oven for 20 minutes on a low temperature. And just make sure you take them out carefully, they're quite hot. But I would let the jar cool down before I put the fermented veggies in there, always. Just remembering everything's kind of heat sensitive. And just reuse all the jars you have at home. Like this is a fermenting jar, but to be honest, that doesn't really make that big a difference. Reuse your jars, you can do smaller than that, you can do bigger, you could do a whole bunch of cabbage and then do different flavours in smaller jars, knowing that it will be a quicker process, it won't take maybe a full week. And yeah, any questions on the fermenting the veggies?
Just a question, so
Yeah.
once it's to taste, you whack it in the fridge.
Yes, thank you. This is why I need people asking questions because otherwise I forget because I'm so used to doing it myself. Yeah.
Does it last in the fridge for?
Oh, months and months. Yeah, that's actually a really good point because some people, once they start eating fermented veggies, they don't treat it the way it should be, which is like a condiment. So a small serving with each meal. Start slowly, a spoonful maybe in one meal a day, and you will get to the point where you can have a spoonful with every meal. We tend to overdo things that are really good for us naturally, where you think, oh, it's superfood, this and that, and we just have way too big a serving size. If you go too hard too soon, it's like training, you can injure yourself or you'll pull up a bit sore. You might not do your gut any favours by having too much in your diet. I once knew someone who the first time they bought a jar thought that they could eat the whole jar with just like a little bit of something else in their meal and they were very, very ill. It just turmoil down there. So yeah, small serving. And once you've tasted it and it tastes great, take it out of the cupboard, put it in the fridge and it will slow down, not completely stop the fermenting process, but slow it down so that it won't go too far. It won't be too vinegary or too sour. Yeah. So yeah, small serving size for this one. And it's the same with kombucha when I talk about that too. There's this kombucha craze where people are just drinking bottles and bottles of it. And it's a small serving size of kombucha, it's the same thing. If you're someone who is a bit unsure of their gut health, so maybe you're having some issues with digestion and pain while eating, this is a great option for helping to rebuild your gut. Kombucha, on the other hand, I always say to people, don't use this as something to help rebuild your gut flora. This is your better option. This can actually cause a bit of havoc for you as well. So if you've Candida, for example, if you've got an overgrowth of bad bacteria, this is going to be better for you with a good probiotic capsule as well, as opposed to kombucha. Yeah. Yep.
When you know it's ready, is it the fizz thing?
Yeah, it's fizz and taste. Yep. It'll taste like, yeah, kind of like a soggy, lovely, sour vegetable mix. It's a good point because if you've never had sauerkraut before, it might pay to buy a shop bottle, taste it, so you know. It's never going to taste exactly like that though. So things that are mass produced, they're always going to taste different. And so we don't strive for that, but have in mind the taste. It is, if you've never had it before, a very different taste, the sourness of it and a little bit vinegary and mushy vegetable. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah. But you can try some of this and then you'll know, actually. I don't know, do people want to try some if I get some servings going? Yeah. Could any coaches help with some serving up of?
The whey.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, it's hard.
When you separate
Yep.
that yogurt,
Yeah.
is the lactose in the whey or is it in the...
Yeah, so you're separating, it's more the cheese. Yeah, it's more the cheese. But yogurt is one of those ones where when it comes to talking about dairy, we've got a few things to consider. So there's the milk protein, so casein, and then you've got the milk sugar. So there's two elements to think about. A lot of people find that when you've got like a fermented or soured dairy product, that there's no issues actually digesting it and tolerating it, even if you're lactose intolerant. So cream's one of those examples. Butter, ghee's a little bit different because we've removed the milk solids. So it depends. It's more a case of the dairy being, when you look at cow's milk and it being pasteurised, homogenised in the treating process, and actually looking at the quality of the dairy source as well. You know, I always say that a vegetable in the ground growing, if you expect the nutrients to be in that when the soil is depleted and full of chemicals, it's not going to happen. It's the same with dairy. So if you're buying dairy from a source where there's they're not fed what they're meant to be eating, there's mistreatment, you know, they're pumping out milk constantly. It's the same thing. Yeah. Yes. Yep. Can it be put on pizza? Ah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it won't melt as much as like a yellow cheese. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Like a buffalo mozzarella kind of cheese. It's kind of like that. Definitely, that's a good idea. Yeah, very good idea actually. Excellent. I think coming into summer is the best time to start doing this because it's so quick to actually you have such a fast turnover. And if you find the perfect spot in your house, like it needs to be we used to live in a place where it had a fermenting cupboard. So it was actually a really old place that had a fermenting cupboard and it was amazing. Everything would happen magically in like 2 days. But if you've got a temperature sensitive house, which I now do, it is a little bit more challenging, which is a beautiful segue into my kombucha because she's not happy with me at the moment. Usually when you look at a jar of kombucha, the SCOBY or the mother culture is floating on top. Mine's sulking. So if I hold it up, I'm actually going to pull her out in a second. But kombucha has gone crazy. It's so popular now. There's some massive differences though to keep in mind when you do your own home brew and when you buy kombucha from the shop. So when you open it at the shop, it's really carbonated. Like it bubbles and fizzes straight away and it's really bubbly. Traditional kombucha is not that bubbly. There is definitely the carbonation to it, but not to that extent. So again, it's a really important thing to keep in mind if you're used to buying a commercial product. When you start making it yourself, it does, when you finish a batch, it's quite bubbly for the first couple. It's too cold for me because mine originally came from Queensland, this SCOBY. Melbourne's too cold. I'm just going to go to the bottom and sleep. See, I'll put it this, then I'll bring her out of the cupboard. So even when it's sinking on the bottom, it will work. You'll still get your kombucha. So once you've left it I'm not going to go through the instructions because it's quite specific in the booklet. And if you do order online, that company will give you their version. So the versions can vary with amounts and things.
Kerry, could you cut that one and share that with like friends?
Definitely,
Okay.
with really sterile scissors. Okay. Yep. So yeah, you can definitely do that. Yep. So it's once you put it all together and you've actually had it brewing for 2 weeks, what you do is you strain or you pour it into jars, leaving enough of the mixture or the kombucha for your next batch, as well as the SCOBY in the jar, obviously. You don't need to wash the jar every time you do it because it's like all things with bacteria, there's good stuff going on in there. Just let it do its magic. Maybe wash the jar every month or two by or a couple of months, I guess, by putting her in a bowl and giving it a good scrub. When you've got your bottles, so let's just say I poured it into these bottles, that's when I can start flavouring it and doing really cool things. So it's called a secondary ferment and it doesn't need oxygen. So what you do now, if I had a bottle like this one's actually apple and cardamom. So I sliced up some fresh apple and some cardamom pods and put them in here, put the lid on, and then left it for a couple of days. Now that's when you get the really intense carbonation. So I've had cases where I've taken the lid off and it feels like it's about to blow up in my face. If you leave it for too long, it'll get really, the pressure will build up, and you can tell just by pushing down on the lid. So that's a secondary ferment, and that's why you get all these cool flavours in the shop that you see. So ginger's a basic one, but this one's probably my favourite. I've done 1 bottle of original, and I've got some apple and cardamom for samples. The other thing too, Sarah Wilson's really big on kombucha and things, and she often talks about swapping in different sugar sources like rice malt syrup and things. To be honest, the sugar is what feeds the SCOBY, so she needs that. If you don't give her enough sugar, she can't do her job properly. It's like starving her. She gets a little bit hangry and she might not cooperate. So I would always recommend using organic raw sugar and not worrying about thinking, oh, it's a sugary drink. It's actually, there's a very small amount of residual sugar left. So don't be concerned. It's a very minute amount. And the worst thing you can do is actually starve your culture. So I might get some samples of this going round. If anyone wants to be poorer.
Yeah. So can the SCOBY survive without liquid?
No, she'll dry out. She'll shrivel.
She's really temperamental.
She is. But when she's on, she's on. Yeah. She's good.
She lost.
Good question, forever. If you treat her well, she will stay with you forever. Like any good woman. Yeah. But if you're going, say for example, you're going backpacking through South America for 6 months and you obviously can't take your SCOBY with you, you can, you can try. I haven't tried it before, but you can put it in the fridge, and that's when it almost puts her to sleep, so she becomes dormant.
In water?
No, in the actual kombucha. Yeah, so she'll be dormant, she'll go to sleep, and then when you're ready to start brewing again, you can bring her back to life by just doing the normal process. Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff.
So when you brew the tea,
Yep.
do you brew it in hot water?
Yeah, so it's just filtered water if possible. Boil it in a pot, add the sugar in at a certain point, dissolve the sugar. Woo! Do you hear that?
Champagne.
Yeah.